Matthew Pauly published his definitive biography of Bruce Lee in June 2018. In it, he proposes an overlooked and largely unnoticed theory related to the sudden and mysterious passing of Bruce Lee. Rather than the official explanation related to an apparent allergy to aspirin, which he had taken many times previously throughout his life, he suggests, based on evidence collected, that heat exhaustion and heat stroke may have been the actual culprits. Unknown to many people, 6 months before Bruce Lee had passed, he received a surgery for hyperhidrosis, where it was claimed that he had his armpit sweat glands removed. Though, I believe that this is a misconception regarding the actual specific surgery that was performed. In most cases, the actual procedure for hyperhidrosis is a sympathecotomy, where the sympathetic nerves and the sympathetic chain which sends signals to the sweat glands are actually cut and cauterized. Even if the procedure he had was different, which I truly don't think it was based on evidence I will be showing, the overall outcome and end result of thermoregulation and nervous system problems ended up being the same. Mirror dry, which is a newer method for armpit sweat removal, does this by burning the sweat glands with microwave energy rather than any sort of physical removal. On one of their website, sort of Q&As, it states, "Myth number 2, there is no safe way to remove armpit sweat glands. In the past, you can only remove armpit sweat glands through a surgery known as endoscopic thoracic sympathecotomy, ETS, but it's an extremely invasive procedure that may cause more harm than good." So Mirror Dry, the top FDA-approved method for excessive armpit sweat, acknowledges that there is no actual surgery which removes sweat glands. It was actually a thoracic sympathecotomy, ETS, which doesn't actually remove sweat glands, but the nerve signals to them, just misdescribed and mislabeled in a way, which is understandable as it is a very rare procedure. The body has 2 to 4 million sweat glands. Actually removing them would require cutting out chunks of flesh. Here are medical records provided by Matthew Pauly, the author, showing that indeed a sweat gland sort of surgery was performed. These documents were sent by the doctor to the life insurance company after Bruce's death. I myself had a sympathecotomy for hyperhidrosis of the palms. I was a very active skateboarder and rapidly began overheating during any form of exercise. I subconsciously knew there was something very wrong with me, but I loved skating and exercise so much there was no way I could stop. This led to a medical emergency which parallels what happened to Bruce Lee, but I will get back to the details of that later on. But I will now read a summary of the events on History.com written by Matthew Pauly. The experts were so focused on what happened on July 20th that they failed to adequately consider earlier evidence. Several months before his death, Lee had an operation to remove the sweat glands from his armpits because he thought dank pits looked bad on screen. This reduced his body's ability to dissipate heat. 10 weeks before his death on May 10th, Lee walked into a tiny dubbing room to re-record dialogue for Enter the Dragon. The engineers turned off the air conditioner to avoid having its noise ruin the soundtrack. After about 30 minutes in the sauna-like room, Lee fainted and started convulsing. He was rushed to the hospital and nearly died from cerebral edema. The doctors diagnosed and treated it in the nick of time. None of them realized this collapse was most likely due to a heat stroke, one of the most common killers of young athletic men in the summer months. A common finding for the autopsy of heat stroke victims is cerebral edema. A person who has suffered one heat stroke is at increased risk for another, says Dr. Lisa Leon, an expert in hyperthermia at the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. Patients experience multi-organ dysfunction during the hours, days, and weeks of recovery, which increases the risk of long-term disability and death. According to records at the Hong Kong Observatory, July 20th, 1973 was the hottest day of the month that year in tropical Hong Kong. The oppressive heat was weighing heavily on Lee and Chow. Bruce wasn't feeling very well, Chow told me, revealing details never previously reported. I wasn't feeling very well either. I think we had some water and then he was acting. In Bruce's bubbling enthusiasm over Game of Death and Lazenby's potential participation in it, he jumped up and began performing scene after scene. He was always very active, Chow told me. In telling the story, he acted out the whole thing, so that probably made him feel a little tired and thirsty. After a few sips, he seemed to be a little dizzy. I find this to be odd. Why the sudden intolerance to his high-energy personality? Why the sudden physical intolerance to acting how he has always acted his entire life? At this point, he complained of a headache, a common symptom of hyperthermia, took the pain medication Betty offered him, and went to lie down. Unlike on May 10th, no one suspected anything was wrong, and he died before anyone could get him to the hospital to treat him for cerebral edema, which in retrospect seems clearly to have been caused by heat stroke. But what was the heat stroke caused by? What was the root of why his body couldn't tolerate what he had been doing his entire life? Exercising and doing martial arts all day in hot climates. That's what he's been doing for the past 15 or 20 years. So, why the change? Here is a thermal imaging picture of someone who has had their autonomic or sympathetic nervous system butchered with this procedure. Notice the perpetually overheating head, and apply this to an extreme level martial artist exercising at the most intense levels. And imagine what that could do to the brain and really the whole body. Again, Bruce Lee had 2 separate events of this sort of overheating, exhaustion, and brain edema. Other explanations don't address something underlying his health was occurring over time, not just one random final incident. He was consuming a lot of hash or marijuana, perhaps to cope with the extreme thermoregulation problems he was feeling in his body, but not fully understanding, since receiving the surgery only 6 months prior. The surgery induces dysautonomia, a systemic chronic dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, which controls things like thermoregulation of the brain and head, and skin over the entire body. So in regards to what happened to me, I had a seizure, electrolyte problems, and was throwing up. I went to the hospital and edema was found in my brain. Basically exactly what happened to Bruce Lee. This surgery has utterly ruined my life and the life of countless people all over the planet, who are outright lied to about the actual risks. I was forced to stop skating and exercising. Surgeons continue to get away with performing it and make the claim that the main side effect to even pay attention to is compensatory sweating, which simply means sweating on other parts of the body. Nowhere do they disclose destruction of the ability to adapt to thermal changes, the paralyzing of the autonomic nervous system, perpetual overheating of the head, which can literally lead to heat stroke on exertion. I truly can't comprehend how this is allowed to go on. I actually emailed Matthew Pauly and shared my story. He thanked me and agreed that potentially a sympathicotomy was the procedure performed and that I had taught him something new and gave him something new to think about. Not everyone exerts themselves at the level of Bruce Lee or skaters skateboarding at the skate park for 7 hours a day. That's some brightly burning chi energy. Short-circuiting that level of chi is dangerous, like a broken high-voltage electrical wire. So not everyone breaks down their body as rapidly via the surgery. Some people's autonomic nervous system and thermoregulation issues can show up years later, which allows the actual extreme danger of this procedure to be largely ignored and overlooked by most doctors, blamed on other health problems, or simply just natural aging, depending upon when you get the surgery. Most patients are ignored when trying to explain what this procedure had done to them. It is literally a lobotomy of the body, altering basic feeling control by autonomic nerves and the ability to engage in fight or flight, response, and thermal changes. I have other videos on my channel going into detail about all of this, which you can check out if you like. So I'm making this video to call for justice for victims of this insane surgery. The surgery in a sense removes the ability to be like water or to adapt, which requires the autonomic nervous system and the proper functioning of water or sweat in the body. The world needs to become aware of this. People need to be properly informed about the actual side effects or just outright effects of this procedure. No doctor performing this is showing a potential patient this type of imagery. A broken thermoregulatory system leading to perpetual overheating of the head. Who is going to sign up for that? No one. They simply downplay mild compensatory sweating as an easy to deal with, very mild side effect, not the annihilation of someone's life and identity. It's very likely that even if Bruce hadn't passed away during the second brain edema event, his overall ability to perform martial arts and exercise was severely damaged because something was occurring in his health. So should this be considered medical fraud and extreme medical malpractice? You decide. We need help, we need justice. My entire adult life has been destroyed along with many others. Here's an email I used regarding this surgery. I'm open to hearing from doctors, neurologists, journalists, or anyone that can help victims of this malpractice. I also will leave this email in the description below. I make this video with the utmost respect for Bruce Lee and his family. The world deserves to hear what I believe to be the obvious and truthful explanation to what happened to him, with a clear scientific backing. Thank you for listening. I know it's a very strange and hard to listen to type of thing. Never in a million years would I think I would be making this as a video. But I had to make it, and I had to put it out there into the world to be heard, so thank you for listening.